So hello and welcome back to the MCC Brussels podcast. We hope you had a good break. We're back for the new year, which is going to be as busy as our last one. This week, we're delighted to be joined by some new guests for the podcast. Delighted to welcome András László from the Patriots for Europe group representing Fidesz.
Hello.
And also delighted to be joined by Hubert from the Süddeutsche Zeitung. We had a great conversation yesterday, so I'm delighted to see you again.
Thank you very much. Great pronunciation.
There's really been one topic that's dominated the news, which we're going to focus a little bit more in depth today. But we're also going to tackle the Austrian results and the new government being formed there. But to kick us off, this topic, which, as I say, has really dominated headlines, is the inauguration next week. Trump will be taking office. What is all of this going to mean for Europe? And especially figures around Trump, such as Elon Musk, have really been kind of stirring the pot, whether it's with the German elections or more generally the kind of increasingly frosty relationship between America and EU elites. So, András, I noticed you were being quote tweeted by Elon Musk the other day. What do you make of his forays into European politics?
I think there's a real atmosphere of change and an atmosphere of, this is the moment to get things done. To undo a lot of the leftist policies done by the Biden administration. That now the new majority, both in Congress, in both houses, the House and the Senate, Republicans now want to do away with, and bring forward their own policies, as well as, of course, they're going to take over the White House starting 20 January. Yeah. So it's going to be a big change, and they have that kind of enthusiasm, they have that energy. And they think, they can get things done very quickly, not only in the U.S., but also through in their issues regarding to international trade and partnerships. And I think that's the kind of energy and kind of a bulldozer style that we see right now from the U.S., which is understandable after the elections they had in November. The question is really, does Europe know what it wants, how we want to overcome our own crises? What our interests are, can we define them? Are we willing to have these debates? Because if not, obviously, our position will be much, much weaker.
Yeah, and Hubert, specifically on this question of Elon Musk kind of getting involved, it's obviously drawn a huge amount of criticism. Some would even say panic among lots of kind of media gatekeepers and European elites. What do you make of his sudden kind of interest in European politics?
It's interesting. I think the right word of the reaction, to describe the reaction, I think would be panic more. And I think that is fed by a certain helplessness, because traditional politics does not know how to deal with something like that. So I think there's a realization that you have a new player with probably very serious business interests in Europe, but who acts in a very untraditional way and through very untraditional channels, of course. And I think to deal with this sort of actor is very, very difficult for European politicians. I think that's the main problem in finding out how to react to his stirring up shit, as you said. Yeah.
And András, this kind of influence of figures associated with the Trump movement in Europe, we don't just want to ask, what is that going to mean for Europe going forward? But especially for European elites, there seems to be this sense that they reach immediately for the familiar tools of kind of censorship, enforcement of the Digital Services Act, and so on. What have you made of all of this and the kind of furore around the interventions, especially of Musk?
I think Musk is starting to understand the influence and the impact he has on freedom of speech and also political debates after his takeover of Twitter, now X, and how he has undone a lot of the filtering and the political bias that was beforehand. And now he feels that, if change can happen in the United States, then why shouldn't change happen elsewhere either? If we look at it, basically the status quo after the 1990s, after the Cold War, was pretty stable in terms of foreign policy, in terms of NATO, in terms of a lot of things. And that kind of bipartisanship, which was very usual in the United States, because you need it in a lot of the cases when you want to do legislation, that is now changing in the U.S. Because they have transformed the Republican Party. So a lot of the bipartisan feeling, the bipartisan approach, which used to be there, got weaker and weaker, and people wanted change. And first, I think in 2016, with the election of Trump, they managed to change the Republican Party, and even afterwards, because still back then, the Republican Party was very hostile, or a lot of Republicans were hostile to Donald Trump. This is no longer the case. He basically took over the party almost entirely. So this is going to be a very different Trump presidency. And what they see now is that there's going to be actually a lot more political conflict, more debates, and more issues on which there's a more serious battle between the two political sides. Well, Europe is not living that change yet. What we've seen also in the last 30 years is that most of the parties have gotten used to each other, who their opponents are, and there hasn't been a lot of new players emerging in European politics, mostly I would say in domestic politics either. This is changing. This has changed in Hungary in 2010, I would say. The traditional deadlock of always having, at least on some issues, need to find compromise was broken out of the will of the people and election results. And but this has not happened in many other European countries until 2024, I would say, when more and more very patriotic anti-immigration parties have made big gains at elections, which continued through the early elections in France, which we see in the Netherlands, which we see now with the elections in Austria. And everyone, I think, is mostly concerned of the old elites about what's going to happen at the German elections for the same reason, because it's the biggest country, it's the biggest economy in the European Union. So that will determine actually the future of politics at European level. And it will determine also the future of the European economy, because Germany is the biggest industry, is the biggest economy. Most of the European economies are closely tied to what's going on in the German economy. So everyone has its focus there. And, you know, the change that has started in the US is seemingly also happening in Europe, although at a slower pace.
Yeah. And Hubert, I mean, to put a question to you that you put to me, like, what's the balance or what's the line between, like, we all recognize that there are these insurgent forces, populist mood and movements in lots of European countries. What's the difference between kind of having a platform for them and then kind of stirring it up or unduly influencing? Like, what's the line, and is Elon Musk kind of on the wrong side of it?
I would frame the whole discussion a little bit different. I think, you know, you're talking about elites and how they get overruled by this populist movement. I think the analysis, I think, is correct, but I don't know if that tells us a lot about how the new Trump administration and Europe will interact, no matter who and which governments are in power in Europe, right? I think the new Trump, I would say, does not care whether the old elites are ruling in Europe or whether it's new governments. It's more right-wing populist movements. He has certain economic interests he wants to enforce vis-a-vis Europe, and I think to make a distinction between the elites and the population in that context doesn't make a lot of sense, because no matter who rules in Hungary, no matter who rules in Germany, Germans and Hungarians will be hard hit by tariffs that Trump puts in place, and he will not stop putting tariffs in place just because Hungary has a sympathetic government and, you know, he likes the head of government, or whether Germany is ruled by a social green coalition. I think that is so. I think if we think about internal politics, that framing of analysis works very well. If we think about EU-US relations, I think it doesn't take us very far.
Yeah, and András, this is an interesting point for those of us who would identify ourselves as populists or patriots or whatever. Like Trump is going to pursue an American interest. He said this would be America first. What does that mean, even for movements or governments in Europe that you might be kind of similar to in a level of values? What does it actually mean? Is it going to be a difficult ride for us?
I think it encourages also in Europe to the citizens and also to politicians to be courageous and stand up and say, you know, well, if it's okay to say it's America first, then it's okay to say Hungary first, it's okay to say Germany first or France first or etc. And at the end of the day, that's how the European Union was created, that we should be negotiating about our interests and mutual interests based on mutual respect instead of war. So I think this will be very healthy, because what we have right now is everything is sugar-coated with this kind of humanitarian and very PC talk for many, many years now. And there's no honest discussion about what is the interest of one country, the other country. Instead, all of this is done behind closed doors. And in the public life, a lot of the debates are being very superficial. What I've meant in my previous thoughts is that because there's this change going on in the United States, they feel that there's possibility for such change also in Europe. Elon Musk saw through Twitter and through the censorship, light or hard censorship that was going on there, that there's actually, the debate is being suppressed. And obviously, when he sees now information more and more what's going on his platform in European politics, he also expresses outrage, just like many Europeans. But that kind of outrage was muted for a very long time. So I think if there's going to be a more outspoken American leadership, it's going to allow for more outspoken debates also at European level, whether it's intra-European issues which we're going to be discussing, or the future of transatlantic relations. Obviously, I agree to a degree with the fact that the US does not have the same interest as Europe on many issues. But when the US will enact, for example, border protection measures on its southern border and implement large-scale deportation, it will be also something we should be looking at, how this can be done legally, how this can be done effectively, how this can be done in practice, because we are also failing at that at European level. Even when there are deportation orders issued by French authorities, by German authorities, etc., they cannot be carried out. We're stuck. If we let people in illegally, it's 90% chance that we're stuck with those people. It will be impossible to return them anywhere. And with the European Migration Pact having next year, we're going to have to start implementing it. It's going to raise a very interesting question. How do we implement? And with the US administration taking a new direction and a tough border protection direction in the US, this is somewhere where we can actually look for best practices and what we can implement at European level to stop our situation of mass illegal immigration that has been enduring for 10 years.
Yeah. And Hubert, do you think there's I guess the question is, does the Trump presidency kind of open up new political possibilities in Europe for European populists? Or is there, and I sometimes worry about this, a danger that people who are sympathetic to Trump become so kind of enamored with him that it just becomes a new kind of copying America? It's like a American hegemony kind of 2.0, where instead of we follow all the woke stuff, we now follow all the other things, and we still don't kind of discuss what it means to be European.
I think right now the big hit that the beast of wokeness has taken by Trump's victory, I think, is overshadowing a little bit the substantial pain that that Trump can cause Europe in the field of economy and the field of security especially. And of course, I mean, European right-wing movements can learn, they can copy some methods, and I think they do. But I think it might be a rude awakening for them if people in Europe start losing jobs because of tariffs, and that is going to happen. And I think there will not be a distinction between the right and the wrong governments. It's going to be blanket. It's going to be every European country that has a certain export industry, and I mean there are studies from the Commission that say the risk to the Hungarian economy, not in $1 billion, but relatively to Trump tariffs, is the biggest in Europe. They have the biggest exposure. So I think I can understand. I don't share, but I can understand the enthusiasm of some of the right-wing populist movements in Europe. I can understand that. I'm not one of them. I don't belong to them, but I can see why they are happy and why they celebrate Trump's victory. But I think, it's a case of, be careful what you wish for, because it will not be Trump. And then, where at your point, Trump will not be the protector of right-wing personas in Europe. I think in the end, he cares. The bottom line is what's the trade balance, and if that looks right, he's fine. And if it looks wrong, and it mostly looks wrong in his eyes, then it's not going to be nice. And then you will have a situation where everybody's going to look to Brussels, to the Commission, to protect them. So I think we could find ourselves in a very, very different situation 6 months from now.
I beg to differ on the economic part. I think Europe finds itself in a difficult economic situation because of ourselves. It's not because of the United States. It's not because we are already in a very, very weak economic situation. And the second Trump administration hasn't even taken office yet. It didn't implement any tariffs, etc. We are already in a disastrous economic situation. If you think about the German car industry and the European car industry in total, if you think about the chaos surrounding the European Commission's decision to impose tariffs on Chinese cars, where the member states were completely divided, there was no there was no public debate on it, on what is the right step, why we should be taking this step or that step. It's all was just very random. And the biggest issue for Europe, I think, in the coming years will be, and it already is, the energy issue. Mm-hmm. Because the energy price difference between Europe and the United States already is so important, especially in energy-intensive industries. And with the Biden administration's Inflation Reduction Act, which is a silly name, what it actually does, it basically gives so much subsidy to new industries that it's sucking away the industry of Europe. And this is all before Trump. Mm. And the European Commission did almost nothing against it. Even bigger problem is the political instability in most and especially the largest European countries. In Germany, in France. We have early elections in Germany, which we didn't have for decades. Mm. We had early elections in France where the president actually put himself in a worse situation than before. Mm-hmm. This is ridiculous. And all this in a time when it's the most important war going on in the continent in decades. Mm. And we are weak politically, we are weak economically, we are exposed in terms of energy security, and we're not having these debates. We're having superficial debates. We should be closing our borders, producing and acquiring all the energy we can to decrease the prices before we talk about greening and emissions and etc. Otherwise, we'll be here with a decreasing industry, which is weakening our entire economy. And that's the situation in which we will have a new US government, which is going to be very openly America first. Mm. We're not weak because of what Trump is going to do. We are already weak, which puts us in an even weaker position in the coming years.
And it's a bit depressing, isn't it, Hubert, that many people probably share from different political persuasions your analysis of some of the problems. Maybe Hubert disagrees on some of the solutions, whatever, but there's this huge kind of political, economic, military crisis in Europe. And the lack of leadership is really evident. And it seems to me that the only response that the traditional European elites have to any kind of questions being raised is to fall back on either enforcement of censorship, suppression of public debate. They're obsessed with protecting they look more concerned about protecting the DSA from Elon Musk than they do about kind of reviving Europe's economy. When we can't have a discussion like this, it really is dangerous territory for Europe.
Well, yeah, if that would be the case, it would be dangerous, I think so. I think, in the end, I don't see a lack of discussion. I see a difference of opinion of what to do. And I think that's always the case if you have 27 countries, right? And if you have a country like France that supports nuclear energy openly and forcefully, and you have a country like Germany, that for political reasons, because we did have a political majority against nuclear energy in the country, we might not still have it, but we did have it, and that's when the decisions were made. Then you have a clash and you have to work it out, and then you have discussions. That's the way it is, I think. But I think we should not mistake the fact that not everybody agrees with us for a lack of discussion. There are discussions, I think. There is debate. And maybe, people just come to different conclusions than we would like to see. And I think that cuts both ways. It goes certainly politicians in my country would like to see different electoral results in certain countries, in Austria, namely, but we have to live with it. But I think then other countries have to live with the political realities in that shape Germany. I think that's the way it is.
Well,
just to specify, my experience with no debate going on these real challenges is my experience from the European Parliament.
Yeah.
I'm sure that in different member states there are political discussions about these specific issues. I'm sharing my own experience in this cycle of the European Parliament.
Right, and then picking this up onto the situation in Austria, I mean, maybe Hubert, you can tell us a little bit precisely about what's going on. But for me, the thing that bears example here is how maybe this is a Trump effect type thing, where this is a kind of major governmental change of an important Central European country. And to me, it seems that the reaction to a supposedly far-right, hard-right leader taking power has been much more muted than I would have imagined it being 6 months, 9 months ago. Some people have said that this means that the kind of Cordon Sanitaire is beginning to break down a little bit, that new political possibilities are open in Europe. What have you made of it, Hubert?
I think to a certain extent that's true. I think to a certain extent that's true. I think there's been a gradual realization that we will see that more and more often. We saw it in the Netherlands with the upset victory of Wilders, and we see it now. And I think everybody knew what was coming. I think the shock was that the three parties in the middle, the Conservatives and the Social Democrats and the Liberals, were not able to form a government. I think that was the big shocking thing. And I think, the Cordon Sanitaire is breaking down to a certain degree. You see that in the European Parliament. It's not so much breaking down with your group, the Patriots, but it's clearly breaking down with the ECR, which is a little further to the left than the hard right. I mean, but still to the right of the EPP. So I think it is breaking down. It's not breaking down everywhere with the same speed, and it's certainly going to hold, I think, in Germany. There will not be a coalition with the AfD, but then even in the European Parliament, AfD is a special case, right? It is not even in the Patriots group, it's in the Sovereignists, so it's on the far right. And then their far right member of parliament is not even in the group because he's too far right. So I think so they're a special case, and I would not expect anything like what happened in Austria now happening in Germany.
No, it might not be the same dynamic, András, in Germany, but I wonder if you could give a little insight into why it is that this. How did the FPÖ come to power in Austria? What essentially are they responding to in the public mood that especially the mainstream parties have been really unable to provide? Because I think that's one of the key dynamics right across Europe, is that the mainstream parties refuse to listen on a few issues that voters think are really important. And that obviously empowers the success of these kind of challenger or populist parties. How have you understood this dynamic?
I think Europe is living in a very difficult time now. All countries, economically speaking, because of the war, because of energy prices. I already elaborated on some of this. And the fact that Austria had one of the most stable party systems in the whole of Europe for many, many decades just put this bad situation even more on the shoulders of the old parties, which were, by the way, in grand coalition. And obviously that hit them. And the Freedom Party profited from this situation, but also they have been very constant on their messaging about migration, which was a major issue in Austria, still is. And I think, they had the elections end of September. So basically more than a month before the US elections. I wouldn't so much say it was a US effect on Austria, because it first happened in Austria. It was a historic victory for the Freedom Party. And then what happened is that the old parties, even though the Freedom Party won the elections, and there could have been a Freedom Party, People's Party, right-wing coalition, the People's Party's leader, Nehammer, chose to put himself before national interest. For his own survival, he tried to form a new, even grander coalition with the Liberals, which eventually failed. And this puts all the cards in the hands of Herbert Kickl and the FPÖ to now deliver even more important change than they could have if they would have done a right-wing coalition back in October after the elections. So I wouldn't underestimate the kind of change that is going to happen now in Austria. And since the elections, voters have doubled down with the Freedom Party, our allies, and they are now surging, according to some polls, now close to 40%. Never seen before in Austria. And I think people don't necessarily follow what's going on day to day in coalition talks, etc. But what they feel, their gut feeling, is that we've been duped. We voted for change. It was the first party at the election was clearly the Freedom Party, and all the other parties trying to gang up against them. And they felt that was undemocratic. The voters doubled down at the regional elections with the FPÖ, and that put all the other parties in an impossible situation politically. And the budget talks finally broke the whole negotiations. And now that this has paved the way for even a bigger change in Austria, we're going to have to see what happens. No one can predict, but I think this is really also, if we do a parallel with what's happening in the European Parliament, it's very similar.
Yeah, I want to get onto some of those parallels.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to dominate.
But Hubert.
No, I would not disagree at all with that analysis. I think if a election result shows a strong demand of a large part of the electorate for change, I think it's probably wise to try to incorporate that at some point. I think, it's from a legal standpoint, of course, Nehammer was right. There's no legal right of FPÖ to be included. You govern if you can put together a coalition, but if you're not able to put together a coalition, then you look stupid, and I think that's what happened here.
Yeah.
So,
and I mean, I guess I want to wonder if we can generalize the example a little bit, because it seems to me that the essence of the Cordon Sanitaire has always been this implicit sense that if push comes to shove, the establishment centre-right party and the establishment centre-left party have more in common, they think, with each other than they do with a kind of radical populist, or sometimes of the left or of the right. And in Austria, I think we saw a really good example over many years of how that kind of coziness between the two central parties became eventually unsustainable. We saw this in the presidential election results in Romania, where again two parties of the center become indistinguishable from each other, even though they're nominally on different sides of the political aisle. Is this a kind of warning shot that way of doing things, that approach to the Cordon Sanitaire, is running out of road?
I think it is to a certain extent. I think the warning shot is that if a center-right party tells the voters you don't have to vote for the hard right to get the results you want, they have to deliver. I think they cannot just lean back after the election and say, well, okay, this went well, we don't have to change. So I think there is a certain pressure then there that you have to deliver, and I think you see that very clearly in Germany in the campaign right now, where Friedrich Merz, the center right CDU candidate, is tacking to the right very hard, and he is, especially on immigration, I think that's the biggest problem for all domestic problems for all countries in Europe, most of them. And I think after the election, I think he will not be able to just go back to usual. I think he will have to change the policy substantially.
No, I'm very optimistic regarding the Cordon Sanitaire. We've already seen in the last couple of months a few votes where the Cordon Sanitaire was completely out of question
in the European Parliament.
In the European Parliament, whether it was on Deforestation Act or some amendments regarding illegal immigration. This is not going to hold. I'm an optimist. I think the Cordon Sanitaire is cracking up very, very quickly. And when we have now also the new Commission, the legislative proposals will be coming to the European Parliament. They'll be going to Council as well. And basically, if we want to fix the crises of the European Union and the European economy today, whether it's the migration question, whether it's the energy question, whether it's the emissions regulation, which is strangling our farmers and our industry, the EPP has no other choice than to go with the ECR and Patriots for Europe. We're always categorized as far right or hard right or whatever. Look, the Patriots for Europe group includes 3 Czech parties. One of them comes from the Liberals. We now have the Spanish Vox party, which comes from the European Conservatives and Reformists. We have Fidesz and the Christian Democrats, who until 3 years ago, we were still with the EPP, and we have new parties which were never in European Parliament before. We are a mix. We clearly cross the traditional right-wing, left-wing lines. Simply, we promote policies, common sense policies for the very obvious crises Europe is facing right now. The gameplay around far right or hard right and Cordon Sanitaire is all about grabbing positions in the European Parliament. But at the end of the day, when it comes to voting at the plenaries, in the committees, the numbers all stay the same, regardless who occupies what vice presidents or vice chairmanships, etc. And we already see this happening. And I think if there's going to be more strain on the European economy, which unfortunately I still expect, we will need... there will be more pressure on leaders to change policy. And it's not going to be the socialists or the Greens or the Liberals which are going to form a majority to ease on emissions, to ease on green regulations in general, or to have stricter immigration policies. It's only going to be a coalition of the EPP, the Patriots, and ECR, which, by the way, works very well, very stably in Italy. It works, right-wing coalitions work stably in Sweden, in the Netherlands. It's going to be now in Austria. Practice shows that this works. Yes, it's a breaking with the old habits of one coalition, but it's going to be also breaking with the tradition of very bad compromises.
Yeah, I think I might be slightly more skeptical about the possibility of compromising even with the EPP or with the CDU, CSU in Germany. I think those traditional parties of the centre-right have a lot to answer for with our problems, but I'm sure that you, András, will be going in with your eyes wide open into the kind of dangers of some of those traditional parties. But I think we can leave it there for today. Thank you so much to Hubert and to András for coming in. Really enjoyed this.
Thank you.
We'll be back again with the MCC Brussels podcast very soon. But in the meantime, continue to check out all the rest of the videos on our YouTube. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we'll see you very soon.